Hey book nerds, welcome to my channel. Today is my very belated January wrap-up. So I'm not going to go into why it's late because I have so many books to talk about, but if you're interested, look at my Twitter, look about like what I've said in previous videos. But yeah, finally filming it. So in January I read an amazing 25 books, which is insane. I think apart from August of last year, that's the most books I've read in a single month, which is incredible. I talked about 10 of those previously, which means I have 15 to talk about now. So for some of them I'm just not going to say very much, either because I don't really remember them or because there's ones that I really do want to talk about in detail. So if you have any questions about the books I kind of skim over, feel free to ask me. I will also link blog post reviews for all of my arcs that I talk about, which there's quite a few this month, so they might provide more detail, but like I said, feel free to ask me. So like I said, I read 25 books. My lowest rated book was 1 2-star read. I had 1 2.5 star read, 5 3-star reads, 4 3.5 star reads, 7 4-star reads, 5 4.5 star reads, and 2 5-star reads. So again, pretty good reading month going off ratings. So I'm going to start talking about the books. So the first book I'm going to talk about is Fragments of the Lost by Miranda. This was one of the 4-star reads. I thought this was a thriller. This is actually more of a contemporary story. So this is about a girl, teenage girl, and her boyfriend has just died, but he was her ex-boyfriend at the point when he died, and she doesn't know if people know that they broke up. But she has been invited to clear out his room by his mother, and as she's clearing out stuff, there's some mystery going on. There's quite a few thriller elements near the end, but it does read for the majority like a contemporary, but this was really well written, so I didn't really mind that it wasn't necessarily the thriller I thought it was going to be. The ending was pretty good, it was solid, the characters were interesting from what I remember. I really liked the main character, I liked the depth that she had, and I thought that was really cool, the way that she was kind of written and how her story unfolded. That's all I really remember about that one. But yeah, it was a good read and has redeemed Miranda, so now that's 2 out of 3 books I've read by her that I really like, so I can finally move her from an author I don't like to an author I like. The next book I read was a library book. I still haven't returned it. It is Queen of Hearts by Colleen. This is the first in a series, there's 3 of them, and it is a fantasy series about the Queen of Hearts. It's like a retelling of her story. It was pretty interesting. So she gets a sister who I think is meant to be like the Alice stand-in. At the start of the story, it's revealed that she had a secret sister who's been found, and she suspects the king now wants this secret sister to be the queen rather than her. She's also in love with someone who isn't necessarily in love back with her. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. I really liked what they did, what the author did with the Wonderland concept. It was very unique. It doesn't follow the story too closely, but there's loads of interesting characters. It was pretty mediocre. I gave it 3 stars. I'm not sure if I said that. I would like to carry on with the series, but I don't know when. I requested the other ones from my library, but then the 3rd one came in and not the 2nd one, so at some point I will request them properly and actually go pick them up, but I'm not in a particular rush to finish the series, but it was reasonable. The next book I read was an ARC. It was 8 Perfect Murders by Peter Swanson, and this comes out on the 3rd of March according to Goodreads, or according to NetGalley I think, rather. So I gave this 4.5 stars. This is a thriller about a guy who runs a crime-themed bookshop, and a couple of years before he wrote a list of 8 perfect crimes from from murder mystery fiction, and then in the present day he gets contacted by some policemen because people are committing crimes, like someone is committing crimes following his list, and they think it might be him. This was really well written. I loved this so much. So I will link my blog post down below for lots of detail. But one thing I really liked was, even from reading the blurb, I suspected that the main character might really be behind everything. I'm not going to tell you whether he is or isn't, but one thing I really liked is that it was alluded to within the story itself, which was super cool. So the main character pretty early on brings up the fact that it's quite a common twist to have the narrator be the killer. And it made me so happy because if that had been, so assuming he was the killer, if that had been a twist, it would have like ruined everything. And if he hadn't alluded to it earlier on, I would have read the whole book kind of on edge, expecting that to be the twist at the end. So, like I said, I'm not spoiling whether or not the narrator is behind anything, but by alluding to the possibility earlier on, I was able to relax and not worry about being hit by a twist that I could see coming a mile away, which is really cool. Yeah, it does spoil several murder mysteries, several by Agatha Christie, which I think are really good, so you should probably read them first if you're interested at all. But yeah, this was just like a massive treat for any murder mystery fan. And even if you're not a massive murder mystery fan, it's just a really well constructed thriller. So I would definitely recommend checking this out. The next book I'm just going to mention super quickly. It is Rascal by Jean-Luc Deglin. This is a graphic novel about this cat. This comes out, I think, on the 5th of May. It's just a super cute collection of comic strips. So each page is like its own separate comic about a person who adopts this adorable little black kitten. It's basically about being a cat owner. It's perfect for anyone who loves cats or is like intrigued in like cute little tidbit stories. I read it really quickly. A really nice art style, as you can see from the cover. Super cute, and yeah, fairly repetitive, but that wasn't necessarily a bad thing. Comic strips tend to be quite repetitive, but yeah, it was really good. So the next one I'm also going to talk about fairly quickly. That is Getting Rid of Matthew by Jane Fallon. Can't see that very well, can you? There you go. So this is adult contemporary, kind of a romance. I gave this 3 stars. I actually read this years ago. It was one of the first adult books I ever read. And I noticed the library had the audiobook, so I wanted to listen to the audiobook to see if it was like what I remembered. This is about a woman who has been sleeping with her boss, who's married for quite some time, like 4 years. And then just when she has decided to end their affair, he leaves his wife and moves in with her. So she's now stuck with this man she didn't want to end up with. He's living in a house and she's trying to work out how to dump him without, you know, basically ruining his life because he's just left his wife and his kids for her. This is a book about a pretty terrible person. Like, the main character is not a nice person. I still really enjoyed it. It doesn't necessarily bother me. But this isn't like a fluffy, feel-good type of romance. This is more like everything's a bit garbage kind of romance. And I can't say I necessarily recommend it. I think if the premise intrigues you, then go for it. But there's a bit of karma dodging here and just generic, not very nice people throughout the entire book. So it's a reasonable story, but it's probably not for everyone. So the next book I actually buddy read with the lovely Simone from Me, Simone and I will link her wrap up down below where she talks about it, because then you can reach her channel and you can kind of see like her opinion of it. But it was Her Every Fear, also by Peter Swanson. So having loved 8 Perfect Murders, I was really ready to go into this buddy read, and I had a blast reading with Simone, don't get me wrong, but I did not really like this book. This was my 2.5 star rating. And the main problem with this was the writing. It was really badly written. So the author, the main character was pretty flat. She was uninteresting and kind of kept at a distance from the reader in a really weird way. And there was just no sense of tension in this book. So it would be like, I'm going to talk about the climax, but I'm going to talk about it in a way that's non-spoilery. So like, character A gets attacked by like character B, and then so there you have the attack scene, and then it would flash back to character B deciding to attack character A, and then it would flash back to the fight scene and a police officer enters. And then it would flash back to the police officer getting the call, deciding to come into the scene. And it was just really weird. So you'd have this like dramatic climax and then suddenly it would stop and take you back in time to see events you didn't really need to see. The order of everything was so weird. It was just really hard for me to get into the story. I was intrigued at first, and I think the main character for this actually has a pretty interesting backstory. I liked the way that was done and the kind of impact and the way it was handled. But yeah, it was just not very... It was written so badly that I could not get into the plot at all, and the plot itself was pretty boring. It was very straightforward. I wasn't surprised by anything. There's only really ever 2 suspects that it can be, and you find out pretty early on that it's definitely not one of them, so you know it has to be like the other one. And yeah, it's a bit rubbish really. It's a shame. I also should say there's some trigger warnings for this book. There is reference to abusive relationships and stalking, and obviously there's violence because it's a thriller, but specifically the stalking and abusive relationships. And I don't think there's any rape in it, but I think there's like a pseudo rape or an almost sexual assault, if I can remember correctly. I could be wrong about that. I would encourage you to look up other sources. But yeah, this book just wasn't for me. It's a shame. The next book I read was My Best Friend's Exorcism by Grady Hendrix. This is horror, allegedly. I guess it is a horror. I would not label it a horror personally. I gave this 3 stars, I'll be upfront. I gave it 3 stars. And my main problem with it is it does not read like a horror book. It reads like a contemporary story. And I was kind of bored by it because of that. So this is about 2 girls who've been friends for years, and then they form like a group of 4 girls, I believe. And one night, one of them goes missing in the woods, and she's not found until the morning. And when she's found, there's weird stuff going on, basically. And she's meant to be possessed. But you could easily read this book with no supernatural angle to it at all. You could just read it as someone who has experienced a type of trauma and is now struggling to deal with it, and then gets sucked into like this, basically gets accused of being possessed by a demon. It's really weird and hard to explain. A lot of people love this book, a lot of horror readers love this book, but for me it's not horror, and it's not done in a way that makes it good horror specifically. As a contemporary story, it's pretty solid. I think it's really, really sad. I think it's really, really tragic, and I didn't enjoy reading it for that reason. There's also loads and loads of gross stuff in this that I couldn't personally deal with particularly well, like just really gross like bodily function stuff and that kind of thing. I really struggled with that. And this would have got way lower if it wasn't for the very last chapter. And again, I'm not going to spoil anything, but the very last chapter was so beautifully written that I cried. And I read this whole book, and then I didn't have any emotional attachment to it, and then the last chapter made me cry. I think the last chapter is an amazing piece of writing. I just wish the rest of the book justified it. But yeah, that was sadly my opinion of that. The next book I listened to on audiobook, I'm actually doing a separate video about it, so it will only mention it, but it was Looking for Alaska by John Green. I gave it 3.5 stars. That's all I'm going to say. Look out for my video discussing it in the future. The next book I read was The Stranger's Wife by Anna Lou Weatherly. This was a thriller, and I'm going to be completely honest with you. I gave it 2 stars. I can see I've written down 2 stars. Until I read through trying to get the images for this video, I had no memory of reading this book. And it's really bad because this is an arc I was sent. It came out in January at some point. 16th of January it came out. I know it's a thriller. I don't remember the premise. I will link my blog review down below where it will actually tell you what the book is about. But I didn't want to talk about it now because I've got so many other books to talk about, and I think the fact that I don't remember it says a lot in itself. So yeah, apologies, but I'm not going to say anything more about this book. The next book I read was Wilder Girls by Rory Power. So people rave about this book. I gave it 3.5 stars. This is, I guess, kind of horror, kind of fantasy. Dystopian's the closest thing for me that I would label it. I think it has the feel of like, kind of like the Hunger Games type book. This is about a group of girls who attend this school, and they've been isolated at the school because of this thing called the tox. And basically it's like a weird infection thing, so they're mutating into other stuff, or like they get stuff like I can't remember any of the details, but like one of them gets, say, like fins or something like that. That's not accurate, but it's that kind of thing. This was written very differently than I expected. I think it was good. I don't understand why so many people love it. I don't really know why you'd be obsessed with this book, and that's not to diss anyone who is. If you are obsessed with this book, please tell me why. I would love to know. The writing was okay. Characters, I think it was the characters that let it down for me. I wasn't really attached to any of them. There is female-female romance in this, and that's cool. I'm obviously into that. But also, I wasn't really attached to the characters, so I didn't actually really care that it was in that. And I didn't like the plot at all. I didn't like, when I knew where it was going, I didn't enjoy that, and I do not like how it ended. So yeah, this was just really disappointing to me. It wasn't what I hoped for. It was a shame. It's not a bad book. Still gave it 3.5 stars. But yeah, I think it's been overhyped. So the next book I read was The Alibi Girl by C.J. Skews. This I gave 4 stars out of 5, I believe. Yes, 4 stars out of 5. This is a thriller, and it's about a woman who basically is a compulsive liar, and every single person she meets she tells a different story to, and that is the setup, and that's all the blurb tells you, so it's all I'm going to tell you because I think it's quite good to go into this blind. I really enjoyed this. The writing was great. There was a weird moment with this book where I started reading it in the hairdressers, and it starts off with a scene in the hairdressers, and then later on I read it in the bath, and there was a scene where she's in the bath. It was a little weird. I think the start of this book was stronger than the end. I don't really remember what ended up happening overall, but I know I enjoyed it at the time. I just think that it wasn't maybe the best mystery. I think I mostly enjoyed it. The main character was super interesting. Like, I loved the way she was done. I was fascinated by everything we learnt about her, all the stuff we didn't learn about her. That was really cool, and I loved the initial idea of this book. It was really, really interesting. Maybe it should have had a stronger plot attached later on, but it was really well written, and yeah, I would definitely read more by C.J. Skews. It's made me excited to read her other books. So The Alibi Girl actually came out on the 6th of February, I forgot to mention, but that was an arc. The next book is also an arc, that came out on the 13th of February, and that is The Quarry by Ben Halls. This is a set of short stories, contemporary short stories, all set in this one kind of estate called The Quarry, and all the stories are told by men, and it's just basically about the lives of people living in really, really poor estates. But this was incredibly well done. I gave this 4 stars out of 5. The first 2 stories aren't the best, but after that I got really, really into it. It covers such a wide range of topics. There's loads and loads of trigger warnings for this, so please check out my blog post or ask me if you need any specific trigger warnings, because there's just so much stuff in this book. Having said that, there's not a lot of it's all about dealing with those things rather than them being just part of the plot. The example is a guy with a gambling addiction, and one of the stories is just entirely about his gambling addiction. And all the trigger warnings are like that. There's nothing in there that's not properly written about, in my opinion, and properly dealt with. I was surprised by how much I loved this. The writing is phenomenal. I'm really excited to read more by this author because this is his debut. And I was expecting it maybe to be a little patronising or a little hard to engage with, as I am like a pretty... I'm not posh, but like, you know, I'm privileged. I'm a student in a like great town. I'm not wealthy, but you know, whatever. And I'm a girl. But yeah, I really, really engaged with all of these stories. I thought it was really interesting. I only wish there was more for some of them. Like, I also expected the stories to intersect and they didn't, which I thought was a real shame, especially with the first story. The very first story felt like it should have had consequences, but those consequences never arise, and I expected them to come up later in a different character's story, like we would see how a character had been affected by the actions in the first story, but there's nothing like that at all, really, which I think is a real shame. But yeah, I would really recommend this collection. It's definitely worth a try if you're even remotely interested in the premise, because I thought it would be... I just kind of requested it on a whim, but I'm so glad I did, and like I said, I'm really excited to see what else this author does. Next book is another arc. It also came out on the 6th of February. This is Loved by PC and Kristen Cast. I was so hyped to see this. I'm actually going to do an entirely separate video on it. But this is a new House of Night book, and if you don't know what this means, just either Google House of Night or just wait for my video. I was super hyped for this. Basically, House of Night is like... I don't want to use the word garbage, but it's like an incredibly astounding vampire series. Yeah, like I said, I'm going to do a separate video on it, so I won't talk about it now, but I was so happy I got that arc. I read it in like a day, and I'm so excited to talk about it more with you. I think it's getting quite dark, so apologies if I'm like shrouded in shadow. I look okay on my phone, so I'm just going to keep going. I've only got 2 more books anyway. The next one is The Carnelian Fox by Kay Mcleod. This I love. It's like won in a giveaway, to be completely transparent. I won this from Kaz from Cats and Camera, her channel. I was super hyped when I read it, and I was hoping I love it, and I did. I gave it 4.5 stars, and I promise you that is my 100% genuine review. I was not swayed by the fact that I was given it in a giveaway. If I hadn't liked this book, I probably would have quietly mentioned it and then like quickly moved on. But I do genuinely love it. So this is like set in a world, it's basically Pokemon. It's about a girl called Sam, and she is just setting off on her adventure, and she gets these monster creatures. Yes, they're called gems, and essentially it's about her quest in the world, and it's just really well written. The characters, I loved all of the characters. The characters are really interesting. I liked the creatures. The creatures are described in great detail. You don't have to have experienced Pokemon to understand this book. Like, everything is explained and it stands on its own as a great fantasy story. But if you do love Pokemon, you will genuinely love this book so much. It was such an like enjoyable experience to just step into this world that is familiar but also different. And the characters, I just really want to know more about them. This is the first in a series, and I'm really hyped to read the rest of them. I mean, this one only really just came out, so I might be waiting a while, but it's worth the wait. Yeah, I would just really recommend it. It's also on Kindle Unlimited, so if you have a Kindle Unlimited, you can just read it now, and I would highly recommend it. But yeah, I love this book. This is not an arc, but I also have a full review of this, so I will link that down below if you want to hear me gush about it in more detail. The final book is going to be a little bit of an anticlimax, but it was 12 Doctors, 12 Stories by all of these authors. I got this as an audiobook from my library. I had listened to half of it last year, so I put it on request again, and when it came through I listened to the other half. It's alright. Like, that's gonna be my whole review. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. I listened to the Christmas one. I think the Christmas one is stronger than this. There is some cool stories and cool stuff in it, but I can't say that I was 100% engaged. I think the one that really stands out, I think, is the Neil Gaiman one. The final story that I remember, but all the others kind of have faded from memory now. But if you're a Doctor Who fan, you know, I think most libraries have it. At least I'm a member of 3 libraries because I've lived in like 3 different places and all 3 of them have had it. So it's probably worth a listen if you can get a copy of it. But yes, so that is my way too long January wrap up. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you have any more questions about any of the books, do ask me down below. I will try and organise my February wrap up a little bit easier. I say as it is now the 21st of February right now as I'm filming, but we'll ignore that fact. Yeah, if you have any recommendations or you want to chat about any of the books or all that usual stuff, again, just let me know, comment. Also, I'm just going to self-plug for a second here. Please follow me on Twitter because I actually have more subscribers than I do followers on Twitter. And if I do stuff like take breaks and that, I tend to use Twitter. So I would love to talk to more people on Twitter or just like know that I'm reaching my audience. So I do recommend it. I promise you I do not spam that often. But yeah, anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give me a thumbs up. It helps me out massively. And I hope to see you next time.